Hello, 4% business owners. You have found the Intentional Wealth channel. Welcome. You may have got here today because you were curious about our title. Our theme today is Entrepreneurial Poverty and Zombie Businesses. For a very long time, I have been dedicated to helping entrepreneurs get out of poverty. I used to be a web designer, as you know, Jim, and in the past, I would work with small companies. We used to call them startups back then, before it was all about innovation and tech. Mm-hmm. And I'd work with these small companies who'd gone through something like the self-employment benefit program. And working with them, they would come out of that with a fake business plan that they just did as homework.
Right.
And they wouldn't really know what they were building. They didn't believe they were going to be successful, so they didn't do the full task. And I thought, entrepreneurship is the biggest scam that the government has going, right? Finally, I own my own business. Finally, I'm in charge of my own finances, but they don't actually equip you with the ability to manage your finances and plan to know whether you're going to be in poverty or not. And it's not straightforward, is it?
It's not, and it's a combination of the poverty now, because starting a business always requires some kind of financial sacrifice, whether that's needing to borrow money from a relative, which is a sacrifice for many
people's part, yes.
Many people, or maybe dipping into your savings, or maybe borrowing against an asset that you have, which for most people would be their principal residence. Maybe it's if you're have a really compelling story, you might be able to get a bank loan. Or the technical term in the startup world is bootstrapping. So right. One of the ways to bootstrap business, and you hear about this all the time in the tech community, is you lock yourself in your garage for a year and you build something that actually has value, and then you start to sell it. So however you're going to go about it, there's going to be some finite period of financial sort of minimum stuff going on. You won't be able to pay yourself, or if you pay yourself, you're likely going to be doing it from borrowed money, which has other consequences down the road. So there is that period of it's not even hardship, it's just you have to expect that is going to be part of the journey, that you're going to spend this bit of time, hopefully no more than a year. If after a year you haven't figured out how to turn the time that you've spent and the financial effort that you've put into something that is, truly a business, then there are some decisions to make. But really, that period should not extend beyond the product development stage, if you want to talk about it that way, or service development.
And it shouldn't be shocking to you either, right?
No,
when
absolutely
we talk about how do you recognize if you're in entrepreneurial poverty, or if it's just, this is the stage of business, it's okay, right? We expected this for the first year, maybe 2 years. And if you have a business plan, then it means when you say I expected this, you're not justifying. And we see a ton of this with new business owners, that they can justify for years into their business that starting a business, you can expect it to be hard, you don't expect to break even. And I've heard for the first 3 years, don't expect to do more than break even. Now, I've also seen small businesses, the little tiny businesses coming out of a self-employment benefit program, thinking that means no salary for 3 years. So they haven't really understood what is break-even. What does that mean as break-even for their business versus their life?
Right. So maybe, in my mind, this my business experience says, for the kinds of business owners, so the kinds of businesses of business owners that we work with, that a year from a planning perspective is kind of a reasonable time frame to expect that you will be in some measure of financial constraint, probably not taking a salary or taking a minimum salary, that kind of thing. The length of time till you start generating break even, including paying yourself at least some reasonable amount for your effort, if not your risk. The return on the risk usually comes a little bit later, but at least sort of paying yourself a living wage is partly a function of the product or service that you're going to produce. So if the product is, a software product and it's going to take you 2 years to develop it, then you're going to be 2 years without an income, because that's the financial commitment that you need to make. And for most people, that would, unless you're 23 and living in your parents' garage, that's okay, and then you can build some software at your leisure. But for most people, that probably means some form of external financing.
Right.
But once you've got your product or your service on the market, that 1 year isn't just the preparation or development or launching of the product. It also encompasses the marketing efforts, start generating clients, and to make sure those clients are profitable, and to be able to service those clients, and your accounting, financial reporting system, and your marketing. So that year for most small businesses should cover all of that.
And if you're intentional about that, right? I know when I started my little web design business, that's the one thing that I did well, which was 20 odd years ago. Let's just leave it at that. I said to myself, this first year of business, because it was web design, and it was back in 2001 when nobody really knew what a website was, and they didn't know the difference between a web page and a website and how it worked. I planned on spending that first year getting connections with people in the business community, doing a lot of work for free. I knew that would happen. Mm-hmm. And also getting some credibility, getting an idea of what people did understand. So doing a lot of workshops and finding out what the questions were. That was in my first year plan. What the challenge came for me is I didn't have a second year plan.
Right.
I didn't know what was the possibility, and I justified not looking because web design was very new back then. And you'll hear this from so many business owners, and if you've said it yourself, it's okay. I didn't have a crystal ball. So I pretended that meant I couldn't figure out anything.
Right.
Now, in my SCB program that I took, they did say the fudge factor is real. So the fudge factor, right, tells you that the more things that you are guessing at,
yes,
if you can guess about 3 things, you're not going to be very accurate. If you can guess about 30 things and really consider a bunch of criteria, a bunch of values, that changes everything. It gives you more accuracy, which I would not have guessed.
That's very true. Well, I mean, to call it discipline. So the discipline of going through a planning process where not only are you applying judgment or maybe your research to what the actual assumptions are going to be, but having thought through what the assumptions are puts you in much greater control of your business, because you know what the variables are. And once you understand what the variables are in your business, you have a very good chance of being able to manage them and control them. Otherwise, the business happens to you rather than you managing your business.
Right, because you can get that tunnel vision of thinking this is all I can know. Mm-hmm. So you stop even looking for any other evidence. You stop looking for even things that are failing in your business because you have these blinders on. And if it's failing, then my business is failing. Right. And for me, I do a lot of work with mindset. I couldn't close my web design business until I healed a lot of stuff in myself, because I was telling myself if I failed this business, I had a lot of sunk cost bias into it. So I was just dumping more time in, more energy in, because if I failed, and that's how I thought of it, if my business failed, I was a failure, and I couldn't let it go. So I was intentionally even tunneling in further from what I could have known, what could have been data instead of judgment.
There are sayings in the financial community, in the startup financial community in particular, and some biases that are well recognized. So one of the biases that is well recognized, of course, is adding sunk costs to future decision making is one of the worst things that you can do. Sunk is sunk. You can't change what's behind you, and that sounds really easy to say, and it is really easy to say. But if you can start putting that knowledge in your decision making going forward, you can really change the wisdom of a lot of the decisions that you're making. I think the armed forces have a term for it, and the term they use is, if you're in a hole, stop digging. So that's an important bias to be aware of as you're going through your the launch of your business, because you will have an idea of what you want to do with your business, and reality often doesn't look like your plan. The more you've thought about your plan, as we just discussed, the more sound your assumptions are, because A, you've spent the time determining what the assumptions need to be, and B, you spend some time determining what reasonable values those assumptions have in your plan, the better off you're going to be.
And I love that you talk about biases, because next time we're actually going to dive into some of the biggest biases that you don't even realize you have, that can prevent you from looking at the data and actually uncovering what's in your business. The other thing that I think you said that was really important there is that you have your plan and you've got these assumptions, and it may not look like the plan.
Right.
And that's
Right.
part of the process.
Absolutely.
Right? You're discovering whether there is a space in the market for you in the way you thought. And if there isn't, that is valuable data. I was looking actually at a chart of businesses who failed, and there's a lot of different statistics. 80% of businesses fail in the first year, and 16% of businesses fail in the first year, and 80% fail over time. When you dig into the data, none of it is comprehensive, because it's all in this region, in this year, for this type of business. This is what happens. And so it's interesting to be able to say why people fail, rather than how many are going to fail. And of businesses who fail, 42% of them had discovered there was no need in the marketplace for what they had.
Fascinating.
And that means to me that they did not accept that, did not acknowledge that, and kept flogging something that they could not sell. And maybe they blamed themselves, maybe they blamed their ability or their marketing message, instead of going back to market and saying, why aren't you buying this? What would you buy to solve this problem?
Right.
42%.
That's remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. There are a lot, and using the word terror is probably not too strong a word. It's sometimes terrifying to plan for a whole bunch of reasons that are pragmatic. It takes time, and it takes time away from wanting to do the work in order to step back to plan. It takes a lot of that self-discipline to look inside yourself and your business to figure out what actually you think is going to work. The best time to find out that you don't have a product that is meeting a market need is early in the process, when you're able to plan and go, listen, this is just not, I just don't have something here, as opposed to, being 3 years in and $100,000 borrowed from your in-laws, and now you have a much more significant problem on your hand. So the planning process can be a little bit intimidating. A little bit scary, but everybody owes it to themselves to know, because if you don't measure things, you can't change them. You are going to deviate from your plan. It's the very definition of planning, is that it's in the future, and nothing happens the way you plan it in the future. But unless you know where you're deviating, you can't manage the deviations and bring yourself back onto plan, or frankly, revisit your plan if the deviation is something that's more profound.
And I think that some of the things I see as well is people don't really believe in themselves enough yet, in that first couple of years of business, that they can achieve a bigger vision.
Right.
And so they can start dialing back their vision, dialing back their goals even before they've started. And that can make them afraid to write those goals down, because again, this is proof I did not succeed, as opposed to this is proof that didn't work yet in that fashion. And being able to give yourself some breathing space and say, this plan is an iteration.
Yes, exactly. Planning's not a task. Planning is a process. And it's a terrible thing to confuse a task and a process. So planning is a thing that is continuous in your business, revisiting your plans, managing deviations, thinking about how the plan needs to be updated in order to get you going where you need to go, and managing proactively.
And to know if you're actually sitting in entrepreneurial poverty, you actually have to look at the plan and the data you actually generated, right? So you sit there, you're 4 years into business, your business plan, you pull it out and you right, get rid of all the dust, and if you can find it, and you flip it open and reorient yourself to what you thought you were creating. What else do you need during that process to say, how am I really doing? What financial statements, ideally, right? You don't still have a shoebox that you haven't taken to your bookkeeper,
Yes.
which can happen. But let's say you've got your books up to date and you've filed your income tax over the years, and you're looking at that original, even just that vision you had for your business. How do you know whether you're on track, whether your business is healthy or not? And I know a lot of us have said, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a numbers person, I'm a people person, and that's why my business is a people business.
Right.
In hospitality, teaching hospitality at Georgian College, people would come into hospitality and say, I joined hospitality as a course because I'm a people person. I want to be in a people business. And everything in hospitality is software and databases and customization and automation. So it's this rude awakening. And as a business owner, you've got that as a rude awakening. You are in the financial world. You are managing money, and you are a salesperson as well.
The measurement in business, so having the plan, or even if you don't have a plan, which we'd never advocate, but knowing what measures of your business are important to your success is fundamental to being successful and ultimately growing your business. And it's not an all or nothing thing, and I think that's sometimes sort of a myth that people have. I don't have time to measure anything is very often the case in the early stages of business. And the other extreme is I'm going to measure everything, which inundates you with data and almost no information. So data is just numbers, or and information actually provides management value.
I'm going to stop you for a second because Jim's got some CFO background and he believes that information provides you with management value.
Absolutely.
But we got to kind of pull that apart, right? A CFO tells you the story that your numbers are saying. So you can go to your accountant, you can go to some micro CFO services like we offer and say, what is the story these numbers are telling me? So even if you don't know yet, because you only need to understand your business, you actually can make management decisions from your data and understand the story underneath it.
Right, whether they're financial information, which is a source of a lot of how your business, the health of your business and how it's doing and how it's growing and what that will look like as you grow your business. But there are other things as well. Where do your customers come from? What is the average size? How many do you need? What is the average revenue per customer? It's a little bit financial, so there's an overlap between marketing information and financial information, and human resources information and financial information. But whatever you determine are the appropriate measures for your business, the technical term for them is key performance indicators, or KPIs is what people normally call them. Your systems, your processes for gathering that data need to be good and need to be timely. So share to your point about taking your receipts to your accountant at the end of the year, and then your accountant does your financial statements and tax returns. If you're looking at your financial statements once a year, 6 months after your year end, you are not getting the information you need to manage your business. So that's an important, I think, thing that comes out of the planning process, that you identify what actually matters to your business. It's not going to be 100 things from an information perspective. It's not going to be 0, but it might be 3 to 5 things that you need to keep an eye on.
Do you think that's why people just don't look at their financial statements? Because you said, if you're not looking at them till 6 months after year end. Do people really dive into their financial statements typically and make, if they're waiting that long, I wonder if it's because they don't really know what they're looking for.
I think people don't. So there's a knowledge set required to look at financial statements and understand what you're looking for. One of the things we do with our clients, of course, is educate them as to what is important on their balance sheet, or their profit and loss statement, or their cash flow statement. what I think typically happens is people get their financial statements from their accountant. Their accountant might spend a few minutes sort of explaining their perspective on the year. The client signs the tax return. And the default for most business owners is then to have a look at their bank account, because if the bank account's got cash in it, that's okay. One of the fallacies of having a business that you're trying to grow to turn into an asset is that the bank balance today is an indication of the financial ability of the business to deal with the growth curve, because that is absolutely not the case. So if your financial indicator, if your key financial indicator is your bank balance and you're trying to grow your business, that's probably going to cause some problems down the road.
And I think when you understand the numbers, whether that's your financial numbers or your sales numbers, you do stop being subject to them. They become something you can become objective about. You stop beating yourself up and you start picking them apart, going, why is this happening? And is that the real problem? And in the sales side of things, I will often hear people before they hit the stable level in their business, and really we're talking about that going from survival to stable level in your business when we're talking entrepreneurial poverty and zombie businesses, ideally. Although you can, once you are scaling, experience some of these problems, they won't be ongoing. But when they're going into that level, they can feel subject to their finances. It is what it is, and there's nothing I can do about it. And subject to sales. And they'll say, my sales, my leads come from word of mouth. And what that tells me is you don't have a lead generation process. And you don't have control over your leads. You have to hope that your clients are going to be talking about you. Now, that doesn't mean you can't intentionally build a networking system and build yourself into the flow of your partners, but client word of mouth is not a lead gen system. And when you can see your numbers and understand what they mean, how many leads, how many conversations did that turn into that I could actually sell to that person and close the sale, and what's my conversion rate like, and where can I improve that? Now you're objective again, and you're not beating yourself going, I'm just not this kind of person. I'm not a good salesperson.
And the the zombie company situation is, and we've talked about a few traps there. So there's the lead generation trap. There's the looking at the bank balance trap. There's the I'm still a startup mindset. There's I don't need to do a plan, or I'm not wanting to do a plan, or I'm afraid to do a plan because maybe it creates an accountability that, I don't feel quite up to meeting. Businesses that are affected by a number of those kinds of situations or biases, or that's how they're being managed, those are the businesses that end up as zombie businesses. So they got just enough capital to get them going, hopefully to pay the owner a living wage, but they actually can't progress because of the sum of all of those particular situations don't allow them to think about scaling or affect scaling or appreciate what actually has to be put in place in order to scale successfully and get out of the survival to get into stable mode so that they can then progress to a scalable business.
And so that dead business walking
happens. Dead business walking. That is so zombie companies. Zombie companies are a term that is used extensively in the venture capital community. Venture capitalists, in terms of financing startup businesses, whether it's technology or biotechnology, which is my background, venture capitalists know that a fairly significant proportion of the investments that they make aren't going to be successful. So they, the technical term is they get unicorns, and the unicorns make up for all the companies that didn't make it. So sometimes company dies, but a lot of those companies end up being zombies because they can't scale themselves out of, having raised their first million or their first 10 million, and it's just there's something fundamentally flawed, and sometimes there's no market for the product. in order to grow. But that's a very common term in the financial community, the venture capital community, having these zombie companies around.
And I picture that business owner, even in that small local business company, where they're dipping into their personal line of credit this month to make payroll, and they're saying, yeah, but 3 months ago we hit 150,000 in revenue that month, and we just need to do that again. And they're justifying the moment-to-moment decisions without that long view. And they're saying, well, I'll just work harder. And they're parking in behind their business so people don't know they're not going home till midnight, because they're making up for the fact that their business model doesn't support their business, that the structure's not actually there.
Right.
And they can feed it sometimes for 5 years before their business fails. And so that stat of, 80% of businesses fail in 5 years. But what about those businesses that aren't failing but should be?
Yes. So at some point in a zombie business, you have to rethink your business plan, and hopefully you have one by that point. Hopefully if you had one, you mightn't have ended up as a zombie business. But if at that point you're going, listen, I can't having made wise decisions, I can't grow it, there's a product problem, there's a marketing problem that we can't fix. One of the most terrible biases in human psychology and in the financial kind of world is when you keep adding your sunk costs to your future decision making. Mm-hmm. And it is a normal thing to do. I'm already put $100,000 into this thing, so I need to put another $100,000 in. You can't change your past decisions, and all financial decision making needs to be prospective. So you might get to a point where you go, listen, this didn't work, or I need a completely different business model, so I'm going to flush, because it's already gone anyway. I'm going to sort of walk away from that investment that I made because it didn't work and make another investment. And I think if you're a fan of reading the most successful sort of investors globally in the world, I highly recommend Ray Dalio's stuff. It is a thing that he talks about all the time. You don't get hung up on having made a bad decision, even when you were the entrepreneur that made the decision. It's just a recipe for financial doldrums until you make a different decision.
Right, and telling yourself, oh, I can't quit, I can't stop, it's too big, right? When you are sitting in a business where you're putting out fires all the time and you are exhausted, when you go to bed at night, you cannot fall asleep, you wake up at 2 a.m, sometimes with anxiety, feeling like you're vibrating off the bed, that's not the place to be able to make great decisions. Mm-hmm. So being able to step out of it, even just taking a day with no technology, no business, and really step out of it and get to a place that is not emotional, that isn't how do I fix this? Mm-hmm. And instead is, what do I do next? Right? Recognizing there is no such thing as square one. The knowledge, the experience, the learning, some of the hard knocks you've taken, there is no starting at square one again. You're starting from this new place of wisdom if you make those decisions wisely.
And the characteristics of a zombie company are not different than the financial characteristics of a company that's moving from survivable to stable.
Yes.
So the zombie aspect is not about the financial situation of the company, because all companies going through growth are going to go through those kinds of results. It's just a question of whether or not you get stuck there. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing intrinsically bad about being short on capital because you just landed a large client, you had to buy a bunch of material to serve that client, and now you have no cash in your bank account. But to be able to see it coming, as opposed to, oh my goodness, we're out of cash, I need to work 80 hours a week. Seeing that coming in order to anticipate the financing demand, maybe that's being more aggressive in collecting your existing receivables. Maybe it's negotiating different terms with that client so that you're not out of you're not out of pocket for all the material up front. Maybe it is not taking a salary for 3 months while you cash flow this larger customer. But those kinds of growth things, if they're thoughtfully done, can keep you out of that zombie mode. And if they're done sort of after the fact can create some of these zombie company situations.
So it sounds like we have a fair indication of how to know how it happens, right? It happens because you're not planning. It happens because you are being subject to your business and not really sure what to look at. And there are other aspects as well from a business planning model, that if you did a business plan and you had the support in doing a business plan that shows you projections of cash flow, and it shows you what are your margins, what's your break-even point, what's your profitability on different products, you are positioned to watch for,
yes,
with kind of excitement and kind of a little bit of a gamified atmosphere, is this true? And if you're moving, and we mentioned this before we got started today, you might be in this situation because you are trying to go from self-employed but acting like a business. And those are two very, very different things. Self-employed, you're generating enough business for you to bring home a paycheck. You're keeping your expenses to a minimum because you don't need to dominate a market. You don't need to brand yourself out there. You really are creating a job that gives you the flexibility to live your life, go to your kids' soccer games when you want to, and that might mean you work till 2 a.m. some nights, but you have that flexibility. That's self-employed.
Right.
What are some of the things self-employed people do that throw them into this spiral of, now I'm not even bringing home a paycheck anymore?
The need to move from, so if you're self-employed and you're actually bringing home something akin to the cash that you would receive if you're working for somebody else doing the work that you're doing for your clients, which is sort of the self-employed model. Maybe you earn a bit less because you're much more flexible and you can do the things that you want to do in your lifestyle. That's fantastic. If you move from, I think, from the self-employed idea to thinking, I actually have something here. I think, I mean, I'm doing all the work right now. Maybe it's a service thing. Maybe I'm, whatever you're doing, wholesaling something. Maybe I've got a distribution deal with somebody. I actually think this could be more valuable, could be bigger than me. You are going to go through those financial sacrifices the same way somebody who sets out to say, listen, I'm not aiming to be self-employed. I'm aiming to build and grow a business because I think there's a market demand. Which is a very explicit decision that an entrepreneur would make to do that. And you can see how a self-employed person might slide into that without really recognizing that they had kind of made that decision, because they get more customers all of a sudden. All of a sudden, there are only 8 hours, 10 hours working hours in a day. And all of a sudden, because there's demand or interest, they're not making the same hourly effective rate as they were making when they sort of had a 40-hour a week, if you want to think of it that way, client base. So you could easily slide into becoming starting a business by default from a self-employed place. Right.
And I do a lot of work in coaching, and we do a lot of conversations with business owners, talking to them about stepping out of that employee T4 mindset and recognizing that you are becoming someone new as a business owner. And that gets us to that working in the business versus on the business. As a self-employed business owner, you need to be building good relationships with, even just to get overflow business. There's some good models for getting leads as a self-employed individual. When you move into full business mode, there's a couple of crazy things that happen to you. You need to, now you're competition for people that used to be giving you business. And you need to start spending time working on the business, which means you have fewer hours to do the work. And what this also implies, very strongly, I hope, is that, that thing that you're really, really good at, as a business owner, you stop being the one who does it. That is such a slap in the face for so many people who absolutely went from, I'm the technician in the business, much like the E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. I'm the technician. I'm the one who knows how to do it. I'm the only one who can do it the way I do. I've got the special sauce. And they start a business from that self-employed place.
And these are all transition phases of businesses. In order to build your business to the point where it actually becomes an asset and you're managing your business as the business owner, and ultimately you're an investor in your own business, doesn't mean that over the, let's call it medium term, that you can't step back in and do the thing that you love to do alongside your employees. It's just that that's a thing that at that point that you want to do. So
Yes.
We have a large property developer who is a client, and the business has become very successful, and this individual's love is restoring old houses. So every now and again, this property development company, very successful, will go out and buy an old house so that the owner can work on it. So that's not so that the company will be successful. He stepped back and spent the time building the company, and now that it's built, he can get back in there and do the stuff he loves to do, as a hobby almost.
Right. And so that transition, as you say, and I think that's one of the things that we really talk about a lot, and I'll put a little diagram up here about the transitions you're going through, because they can be invisible to you. There's an old story that isn't true, by the way, and no frogs were really hurt in the testing of it, but there's an old story that says if you put a frog in water and then you slowly turn up the heat, it won't notice the change around him and it will cook. It's not true. But we do that to ourselves, as we're not as smart as frogs. And we've all been through this, where we say it's okay for today. It's okay for this week. It's okay for this quarter. And it reminds me of in the Bee movie, where the bee gets stuck inside the apartment and he's banging his head off the window going, this time, this time, this time, this time. The window's still closed. Right. And how long do we want to bang our heads against it before we say, oh, something has changed. There has been a transition put here. How do I get over that transition?
Yeah, it's good. It's good to have some external perspective on your business, and some people can generate that themselves. Mm-hmm. But most human beings are not capable of stepping outside themselves or their business and seeing the transition point that they're at. Things are always changing, and humans are notoriously, and I would put myself in that, resistant to change.
Yes.
Because you know where you are, and going somewhere else is always a little bit scary, and it's going to be work, and I got enough to do, and that kind of thing. So you can get trapped in this zombie model because you're successful in a way that you hadn't anticipated or hasn't planned. It's caused all these issues, and to step back in order to do the work, to actually build that into a business plan that is going to be executable and will allow you to move into stability and recover your life, for example, is just very hard to do from inside the company.
Yeah, and you can tell yourself a lot of excuses why not to do it today and not to do it this month and not to do it this quarter. I don't have the time, I don't have the money, I don't have the energy. But those are actually all symptoms that you need to do it, and that you probably should have done it before, and that there's probably a critical hire that could help fix that situation, that you can plan into the year ahead, that you suddenly do have that, no, maybe not suddenly, but you do intentionally get that life back again.
Yeah, one of the, yeah, exactly. It's a combination of capacity, so how many hours are available to both meet the client's needs as well as to allow you to step back and be working on the business more and more, which will be required again for a transition period. And the skills. So it's capacity and skills. And a lot of business owners, smaller business owners, don't have access to a range of skills on a not full-time basis. So my business history says that generally I have not gone about hiring an full-time HR person, for example, until our company's had 90 people. But there are a lot of HR issues that you have when you're building up to 90 people when you don't have in-house HR. So there are models to get the expertise that you need on an affordable basis to allow you to move through those growth stages economically, whether that's outsourcing on a fee-for-service basis, a part-time basis, whether it's for limited requirements. It could be mentorship, it can be that kind of thing, but you need to have the capacity and the skills in order to move the business forward.
And because we're not actually talking you're not a 90-employee company, right? You might have 1 to 5 employees. And so those services, that knowledge, that business know-how is absolutely essential. And this critically has been really hard for a small business owner to even know exists,
right.
Knows how to access, and you can end up hiring somebody to do the job who doesn't know how to do the job because you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
And that not knowing, many people say my business is unique though, and unless you've run a business like mine, how can you help me? And realistically, 99% of your problems are the same problems every other business is going through. Your problem absolutely is unique. Your service is unique. You have a process that when you stop doing the work, you will train your employees on how to do. But the real problems that happen in your business aren't about what you're doing. They're about how you're doing it.
Being a business person
has
a very, very well-known, addressable set of challenges. And as you said, Sharon, not knowing is the worst thing that can happen. Knowing and making a risk decision about I can't address that now, that's okay. Businesses do that all the time because resources aren't infinite. Problems are pretty much infinite, but resources aren't infinite, or opportunities are infinite. So you always have to make trade-offs about what you're going to invest in, what you're going to spend your time on, what things you're going to go after in the marketplace. But if you don't know, then you're not in a position to make those informed decisions. And sometimes your business gets impacted positively or negatively by things that you saw but you couldn't address because they just weren't addressable with the resources you had. And that happens in business all the time. But it's much scarier when something impacts you that you didn't see coming. And we've talked about this before. When we talk about companies that fail, companies don't always fail because things go poorly. Companies often fail because things go well, and growth kills companies if it's not managed properly. So the things you don't know could be very positive things that can still negatively impact your business.
And I think that's one of the tough challenges too, is you look at your business, you're like, I'm doing okay, right? I'm succeeding. I've landed a couple of great contracts. I'm following through. I have happy clients that are thrilled that they met me. But that's the inside, the inner workings, the deliverables in your company. So it can be hard to recognize that transition stage and the need for support, the need for being able to see 3 years out,
right,
so that you can prepare. As the business owner, if you're spending too much time working in the business, we call working in the business is at point A. Point B is that 3-year plan. In the business, when you're putting out a fire, if you're trying to go from here to here, point A to point B, but putting out the fire takes you over this way or over this way, you're getting out of the problem mode, but you're not actually heading toward point B. And when you're hitting that level of success, it can feel funny to say, man, I'm successful, I need help.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But it is, as we've seen so often with our clients, it's the challenge of growth. It's the incredible opportunity that you're pursuing to become the business that you saw in your head when you started. That growth is the most difficult thing to manage in business. Managing growth successfully is the biggest challenge.
And it can be easy to think my business is successful, but it's not rewarding me financially yet.
Right.
And the two go together. If you've been in business for 3 or 4 years and you have been running a business for 3 or 4 years, as opposed to saying, I've been self-employed for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and now I'm turning it into a business, right? You can go through that whole 5 years self-employed and not go through these problems,
Yeah, exactly.
and then start the business and go, I guess it was a bad idea, because you don't understand this is going to happen. It's supposed to happen. But if you've been in business for a few years, running that business, and you're starting to see some of these problems, these symptoms of, I'm afraid I can't make payroll this month. How the heck did that happen? Or I'm not able to take a vacation. I'm needed, and I'm making all the decisions in my business still, and I'm putting out fires. Right? That can make you feel like you're just not a good business owner, when realistically that's not a separate being. That's a human being who's learned a set of skills, who's reached out and got some abilities over time. Right? If you think that people who can run their business from gut instinct were born that way, they actually made all the mistakes already.
They very likely have. Yeah. There are always outliers, but essentially there are no businesses that don't go through these growing pains. It is just how business goes. It's, the parallel that you would run is, if you have children, eventually most teenagers get into trouble. Right. There are outliers, but your kids are going to get into trouble at some point. You're going to have to manage that. And all parents know that's coming. They're maybe not ready for what the specific trouble is, but they know that their teenager's probably going to have some challenges that they're going to have to deal with. Businesses are like that. And the challenges are as well known as the general troubles that teenagers get into.
I love that analogy.
So, know that it's coming, and you're not alone, and everybody who has a business goes through these same things. But if you're equipped to deal with the potential for the problems, if you have measurement tools that work for you, that identify that they're coming, if you have a plan that has predicted that these things are likely to happen at a particular point in time, does that ever make building the business easier? Does it ever make it easier?
Yeah, I love that. It's one of the reasons we're doing this show. It's one of the reasons we do what we do, right? Being able to have that outside set of eyes to say, oh, here's where you're at.
Right.
This is what's needed to help you become stable. And also just understanding that problems come from a predictable set of causes that you may not realize, right? If you don't have the cash flow,
right,
identifying the cause can be really hard as the business owner. If you don't have the leads coming in, you can think that it's your tactics that are wrong.
Right.
Maybe it's the wording in my Facebook ad. And I understand that because the gurus are out there teaching that. And you look at the resources out there for businesses trying to fix these problems, these symptoms that they are aware of, and they don't know what the symptoms are of.
Yes, yeah, exactly. They're symptoms of the underlying process of growing a business. Yeah. And the more thoughtfully that's managed fundamentally, the more adept you're going to be at addressing the problems that do pop up.
Because symptoms of success can feel like failure.
They certainly can. They certainly can. Yeah.
And sometimes those symptoms actually are that things are failing. And so realistically, if you are in a business where you've been in business for 3 or 4 years and you are under the poverty line, you're not taking home a living wage. It is time to fix it or exit.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. Again, subject to the product, your business can't be consuming your capital or you. Neither of those things, outside of the normal process of business growth, neither one of those things are good, and you need to identify them as early as possible.
And then based on the lifestyle that you actually want, there are some options of how do I fix it? Maybe I want to take steps back into self-employment again. Or even further, as Jim indicated earlier, back into employment again, because what you do is a valuable skill you can be paid for. And if you would be paid more handsomely, if you had a better boss, as in someone else, then that's something to seriously consider. And if what's actually happened is you got distracted from being unique and focused in the marketplace and tried to do all things for all people and forgot to focus in on intrinsic value that's needed in the marketplace, taking that time to step back and say, oh, this is what I've done to myself. right? That can be magical as well. What that means, if that's what you've done, is you get to free up time, make more money, double your prices, double your time off just by building a better business model that has higher value, higher focus.
And is scalable.
And is scalable, yes. Cool. I think we've covered a whole ton of things. We didn't cover everything we wanted to talk about, but I think what is entrepreneurial poverty? How does that become a zombie business? We know how it happens to you, lacking the skills, lacking the plans, buying into myths, buying into some of the nonsense out in the world, some of those cliches that are not true.
Are not true, yeah.
Some symptoms to tell, are you going through entrepreneurial poverty? And some criteria to say, is it okay this year? Is it okay this quarter? Right?
Yeah, because it looks like, as we said, the zombie company doesn't look a lot different than a company transitioning the growth into stability.
And then the solutions are really stepping back somehow, whether you can do it on your own, whether you need some support, to just step back and look at it objectively so you stop being subject to your business and deliberately say, I'm going to fix it or exit.
Brilliant.
I hope that was helpful. If you have questions on this, we're always going to have little summaries and worksheets and key points to go with the show notes. And we're always here that you can reach out to me and let's just book a time, especially if you are a Simcoe County area business. Let's come and get together, have a coffee, and step outside of your business so that we can look at it with more objective eyes.
See you next time.